Now that we looked at some budgeting, we're going to be able to now look at other people's budgets and do some analysis and try to see, are they on task with their budget? Are they a little off? Do they need some tweaking in their budget? So we're going to start by just looking right at the examples. We have Patrice. She's budgeted $35 a week into a savings account. And this is about 12% of her income. And the question asks, what is her weekly income? So there's some key numbers we got. $35 a week she saves, and that's 12% of her total income. So we're going to look at this, and we're going to try to figure out, as question A asks, what is her weekly income? So what we do know is currently she's saving 12%. Well, 12%, that's 12 out of 100. We're going to set up some ratios here and then do some cross multiplication to figure out what her weekly income is. So if she's saving 12%, which is 12 out of 100, we could say that's the same thing as $35 out of some weekly income, like the total income she has. Her total income would be represented by this ratio. So now if we cross multiply, we draw this cross, one of the lines has two numbers on it. Those are what we multiply, the 35 times the 100, and we end up dividing by the number that remains, which is the 12, and this will tell us her weekly income. So again, if we just do it in our calculator, 35 times 100 divided by 12, she's making approximately $291.67 per week. So she makes that, and she saves 12% of it, and 12% of that is $35. Now, if she keeps following this budget, question B asks, how much will she have saved in 1 year? Well, she's saving $35 a week, and there's 52 weeks in a year. So if we multiply these two numbers, 35 and 52, we could see that if she continued saving the same amount each week, she'd save $1,820 in 1 year if she can continue to save 12% of her income, which is $35 a week. Now, part C says, if her salary increases 3% and she continues to put in 12% of her income into savings, how much will she save in a year? Well, we got to think, if her income goes up 3%, so will the amount she actually saves. So all we have to do is figure out in this $1,820 a year, what's 3% of that, and add it on. So we'll say, if her salary increases 3%, so will her savings. So we're going to figure out what 3% of her savings is and add it on. So right now her savings are $1,820 a year. And to figure out 3% of that, we just times by 3% as a decimal, which is 0.03. And if we multiply that, we get $54.60. So this $54.60 represents a 3% increase in her savings. So her total savings at the end of the year, if she got a 3% salary increase, would be the $1,820 plus the $54.60, which is 3% more, which would increase your savings to a grand total of $1,874.60 in a year. So if she increased her savings by 3%, that's what it would amount to. Now I'm going to look at a different way that we could have actually approached this question. The same scenario, it's still going up 3%, and we're still going to start by the 1,820. So we could do it the first way that's written in red, or you could have approached this question in the second way. 3% is 0.03. So this is true. But if she's increasing it by 3%, she's actually going to have 103% of what she originally had. So that is 1.03. So if I just take this 1820 and multiply it by 1.03, and I'll prove this on that calculator, 1820 times by 1.03, which represents 103%. So this one says keep the $1,820, and this 0.03 says add on 3% to that. So if I hit enter, you could see I end up with the exact same amount, $1,874.60 per year. So it doesn't matter which method you use. If you find the 3% and then add it on, or you use 1.03, which all it does is adds it on in part of our calculation. Both of those are viable ways to solve this question. So now we'll jump into Salima. Salima works as a lifeguard and a swimming instructor, and she earns about $2,400 per month. So this is a key number. Her average monthly expenses are as follows. So she spends $760 on rent, $140 on utilities, and so on. So we could read down this list. Then it says she's gone out and actually researched some spending guidelines, and the guidelines give a recommendation of how much income you should spend in each category. So of the $2,400 a month that Salima actually earns, these guidelines for budgeting says this is how much she should be putting in. So for housing, she should only spend between 25 and 35% of that $2,400 on rent and housing. Her utilities between 5 and 10. Her savings should be somewhere between 5 and 15. So here's some guidelines she's researched. So now we go down here and says what changes need to be made so that her spending falls within these guidelines. So what we have to do is we have to go through each and everything in that first table and figure out what percentage this actually represents of her budget. So if we just looked at rent, and I'll do it up here, I'll do it in blue. So we're going to start with rent. Now these percentages are just simply saying, well, she spends $760 on rent out of $2,400 total. If I times that by 100, this will tell me the percent she actually spends. And we'll just round to one decimal place. So again, in the calculator, 760 divided by 2,400 times by 100 to put it as a percent, that's about 31.67% she spends in rent. And if you look at the first category, which is housing, 31.67 falls within this range of 25 to 35%. So we look at that and we say, you know what, she's fine on her housing. Nothing's wrong there. So let's look at her utilities next. So her utilities, we're going to say, is $140 out of the $2,400 she spends or earns each month times 100. If we do that, we get 140 divided by the 2,400 would tell us a percent as a decimal. So we times by 100, and she spends about 5.8% on utilities. And again, if we look in the utilities column, she's at the lower end of that, which is good. So what I want you to do now is pause this video and you go through each and every one of these and figure out what her percentage is that she spends of her actual income on all of these expenses. So pause the video now, figure out, do the calculations, writing down your work, and then restart the video to see if your numbers match. So I went through and calculated all the percentages, and you can see rent, we already did 31.67 or 31.7, utilities 5.8, food 16.7, transportation 7.3, entertainment 8.3, clothing 8.3%, savings at 7.5%, and other, the other category in her budget, was 14.4%. So hopefully your numbers matched up with what I had calculated, and now all I did was transfer those numbers into the spending guidelines that Salima actually researched online. So we could see in the first category, housing, 31.7, yeah, that falls into the category, that's good there. Utilities, 5.8, it falls in between 5 and 10, good. So this guy's good, this guy's good. Food, 16.7. That's past the high end of the food budget. So this is a concern right here. We're going to have to address that in question A. Transportation falls between 5 and 15. Entertainment is between 5 and 10, so that's good. Now, if we look at the clothing, it says you should only spend about 2 to 5% of your budget on clothing. she's over in that category. Her savings is between 5 and 15, that's good. And then this other category is well over the high end of other. So it says, what changes does she need to make for her spending to fall within the guidelines? So she needs to look at buying cheaper food, I guess. Cheaper food, maybe no-name brands, or maybe not spending so much on frivolous food items. What else could she do? Spend less on clothing, because she is over the top category there. She's right over top of the 5%. She's at 8.3, so 3% less. And her other, we're not really sure what's in her other, but she should look into costs in the other category and try to find places she can save there. So try to find some savings, because those are the places that her budget is actually saying, you know what, we're out of where we should be on the guidelines. So a lot of work for that question to find the percentages, but this is what we do when we're analyzing some budgets. Look at some suggested guidelines and go from there. The last question on this page is saying, what is the maximum amount that she should be spending on food each month? So if we look back on the food category right here, the maximum amount she should be spending on food at the top level is 15% of her budget. So it is asking what the maximum amount is. So 15% of the money she makes. Now, she makes $2,400 a month. The maximum amount, we need to find 15% of this. So times by 0.15. So if we do these calculations, 2,400 times by 0.15, which is 15%, she should spend no more than $360 a month on food, according to these guidelines. That should be the highest that she spends. And currently right now, she's spending $400. So she needs to find some ways to save in that category. So this is analyzing a budget. There's a lot of front work, as we can see in this question. If we're really truly analyzing, we go through and figure out what percentage of each category we're actually spending from our monthly earnings and see if it fits into some suggested guidelines on the internet or from a budgeting consultant, and then look at ways that we can actually fix this.